everybody. I would propose that we start, although still some people are coming and joining into our session. A very warm welcome from my side. You are here with our digital academy with the topic Protestantism between nationalism and cosmopolitanism. And this is organized by three partners, which is the Protestant League of Hesse and the Community of Protestant Churches in Europe and the Center for Protestant Theology in Eastern Europe in Sibiu. My name is Oliver Engelhardt. I have the honor to be the moderator for this evening. And before we start, I would like to say some information about our way of working here. I hope that most of you are familiar to the Zoom, but if you are not, the most important things are that you can switch, that you have one button at the bottom of your video window. You can see the participants, and you have one button which is called reactions. And this may be important if you want to clap your hands virtually, or if you would like to raise your hand, which you may need when you want to say something. We would like to ask you to switch off your microphones and would like to ask not to turn off your cameras when we are in this meeting. If you want to say something in one of our question slots, you are asked to switch on your microphone. You can show up by raising your hand, your virtually hand in the reactions button. And after you said what you wanted to say, you switch off again your microphone and lower your hand. I think that is not so complicated. I have to say also that our meeting is recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, we don't have the possibility to do so. So we need the recording, but you can leave the meeting and look at the recording later, but I can't promise when it will be available. So I'm glad that all of you are with us now. So you are invited to switch on your camera, and we will soon start with our topic. Our topic is the influence of the Protestant churches under the influence of nationalism, and this is again a new perspective in our digital academy. So far, we had 2 lectures, and they had an approach to the topic from different perspectives. The first was more from rather social sciences approach, and we were talking about some material from our Communion of Protestant Churches in Europe. And the last session was a lot about ecumenical perspectives, especially the Orthodox churches. Today, we would go and have a rather historical approach. This is why I am honored to welcome Dr. Peter Morée from the Charles University in Prague, who is a church historian, and he will be our lecturer for this evening. I can show you. I hope I can show you what we are planning to do. Can you see the schedule? So we will have a lecture in 2 parts so that we have quite some time for your reactions and for some discussion in between. Our experience is that discussion is much more lively and much more interesting when you are in smaller groups. So we will take the opportunity and split you up into breakout rooms for those discussion parts. In order to start, some words on our topic and poll, which I hope is planned from Marcus. Yes, good, very good. So we know nationalism as, or when we are talking about nationalism, we often have in mind a kind of ideology, but it is important to see nationalism also as a historical phenomenon. And that's why we choose one of those lectures to have it from the historical approach. Usually people don't or know quite a lot about their own national background and the uprising of one or maybe 2 nations, but the broader European picture is much more difficult. And what we are often lacking, I think, is the question about the role of churches in nationalism and in this historical development. So that's what we are going to talk about this evening. Now, for a first input, let's have a look to our first question. This is a short mind mapping. It is not really important, but it is for you to, or it is to give you an idea what is going to follow tonight. Marcus, I hear that all the time somebody is still joining in, so they may not have got what you sent in the chat. Could you send it again? And
send it right now. Okay, I'll send it again. Yes, I just let someone in our room.
Yeah.
So that would be the first. Yeah, since that didn't work in Zoom, we did it with Mentimeter again. So
those of you who were here last time, I think you already used this tool. So I invite you to click to the Mentimeter, the first link which you find in the chat. Can you find it? Yeah, I see heads nodding. So did everybody find it? Can we try to have a look on the results? Marcus, are you able to put it on the screen?
I can. I will share my. Okay, here we are. Can you all see it? So, Oliver, do you want to come? Do you see it, Oliver?
Oh, yes, I can see it. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Do you want to comment on it?
Just a few words. I see that most of you decided for it is dangerous, and some would say it is a productive power. That's what I also heard from some people. Interestingly, nobody would say that it is a marginal phenomenon without relevance. Maybe this is also something which is out of our time and which was one of the reasons why we chose this topic for our digital academy. Thank you, Marcus. So I think this one went well. So we could immediately try another one, which is a little bit more about the role of the churches. When you click to the second link, you no, does not work in my case. Is the second one already online, Marcus? Oh yes, I can. Yes, no, I have
Just
it.
posted it in the chat. Yes.
So the second question now would be, if you were a church, what would be a good position for a church to hold? And you are allowed to pick two of those possible answers. We need to take a little bit more time because you may want to read, or you need to read the answers in order to decide for two of those possible answers. So please open the link now, and then we decide for your answers.
Anya, just to draw your attention on, there's a question in the chat. If productive power is meant as necessarily a productive producing something good, or rather something bad, is there how do you understand productive power?
Yeah, that's a question to the first poll we already ended, but it was meant as a rather positive evaluation. Yes. I see the hand from Selina Höhl. Could you switch off?
Yes, I have a question to this Mentimeter. It asked to pick two, but I'm just able to pick one.
That may be a technical problem. Thank you.
Yes. Could you say that again? I didn't hear that quite well.
It seems that the problem is that people cannot pick two answers, although they are asked to pick two.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, sorry for that. I thought that would be part that I did do that, but
is it possible to fix it quickly? Otherwise, we would say just pick the most important answer you see.
Yes, unfortunately, because otherwise we would have to start it all over again, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So please pick only one answer and decide which one would be the most relevant in your opinion.
Try to fix it now, but yeah, just see if you can. Yeah, well, most of you probably gave your answers already, so sorry for that. That's my fault.
Oh yeah, now it's possible to pick two. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Selina, for raising this point. Did everybody already end? Does anybody need some more time? So I cannot see so much faces, so hopefully you are fine with the poll. And Marcus, would you show us again?
Of course. Here we come to the result. Can you see it, Oliver, and all of you?
I can see it. Okay, there are quite some people. The most answers are in two of those possibilities. The first is to see it as a task of the church to support national identity because the church is embedded in this culture, and the answer, welcome people from foreign nations into the life of the society. Interestingly, nobody voted for protest against too much influence of other religions. And also the neutral position, the role of the church as a moderator in political debates without taking an own position, was quite high, with 5 people who voted for that. Thank you. This is just to give you a little bit, to get you a little bit into our topic of today. I'm not sure, maybe this is something we can put somewhere in our documentation so that we have it also later. Now I would like to come to our first part of the lecture. I already welcomed Dr. Peter Morée. He is a scholar from the Protestant Theological Faculty of the Charles University in Prague, originally from the Netherlands. He's working for many, many years already in Prague, in the Czech Republic, and has also a special focus on Central European church history, especially the newer and newest church history, modern times, questions of church positions towards ideologies of the 20th century. And that's why he is a very good person to tell us something more about church's position towards nationalism and the interrelations between churches and nationalism. I'm really curious about your lecture and to hear your lecture. Peter, very warm welcome, and the floor is yours.
So, good evening to all. I hope I'm good to hear from Prague, present at my faculty, the Theological Faculty of Charles University. And I'm happy to be part of your group for this evening. I'm going to talk about nationalism, religion, church, faith, this whole complex of issues in an historical perspective. I have a PowerPoint presentation with a lot of pictures, so don't worry that you have to read too much. I'm going to share that soon. As you have seen, I divided it up into 2 parts. First, we are going to take a look at the way how nationalism uses, instrumentalizes religion, church. So that is the perspective, let's say, from outside on the church. And then in the second part, after the first round of discussion, we'll take a look at the question, what actually did the churches do? What were the responses? And then finally, we come to, of course, the final question, where are we now? And what do we think about all this? If you would have a question in between, don't hesitate to ask. That's, of course, good for me as well, especially also whether what I'm telling and trying to explain is indeed also sort of understandable. Of course, it would be better the type of discussion questions to leave for the breaks, either the first one or the second one, but that's, I guess, obvious. I do indeed like to see you, so if possible, do switch on your camera. If not, I do understand sometimes it's a little bit difficult, but it is much more, let's say, motivating for me from this side to speak to faces than to sort of a black screen. So that's the whole point of that. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see. I think you should be able to see it now, if that's right. Is that correct?
Yes, we can see it.
Good. So part one, nationalism and religion. Obviously, the second part is then religion and nationalism. We focus especially on the churches of the Reformation, or the Reformation as such, because for our understanding, for our role, for our whole debate, that's obviously the more interesting part. So how did nationalism, the nationalist movements of the 19th and the 20th centuries, how did they use nationalism for their purpose? Now, of course, we could go into a debate, actually, what is nationalism? We have to say something at some point about that, but I'm not going into an in-depth debate how to define, and especially how to sort of limit nationalism. Is nationalism only something from modern history, or is it also older? That's an old debate. We are not going into that at this point. We could do that later, but that's rather, I would say, sort of an academic debate. Not an abstract debate, but an academic debate, being more for academics. Nationalism is essentially giving us a story of origin. So, it answers the question, or it intends to answer the question, where do we come from? What are our roots? Where did we start? And obviously, for that, nationalism offers very often an historical answer. So you get historical interpretation of an interpretation of a historical development, going back to mostly the Middle Ages, when it is about European nationalisms. In other cases, sometimes a little bit shorter, dependent on the circumstances, I would say. But mostly we know nationalism as, okay, we are the national view on history. We were a great nation already in the Middle Ages. So nationalism, therefore, offers also an answer to the question, who or what are we actually representing? Tradition, a history that has resulted in something, some values, some aspects that we can show in history. And therefore, nationalism offers some clues, some, let's say, hints, what actually are we today identifying with? So what could be our identity, or what are the aspects of our identity that we are constructing and therefore representing today? And finally, and that's the most important aspect then, I think in the end, nationalism gives us answers to what our political or perhaps social claims, religious even claims, could be based on a story of origin. Okay. Now, this story of origin is a very helpful one for many reasons, because it creates community. Nationalism is a great power because it creates a community, and it has shown that in the 19th century, especially in places where there were different state structures, different borders, different state institutions, multi-ethnic states, multinational states that today are not anymore there, and now that has been transformed, let's say, during a long process into national states. And that's something that is based on that community. So the story of origin creates a community. We belong to that. The sense of belonging is very important there. Not only that, it gives us, as we have seen, a sort of backup, the reasons, the reasoning and the argumentation that we need for our position today. So if we are trying to defend what we actually want, our political program, let's say, then nationalism offers for that certain arguments, and that is often then based on that story of origin. We are coming from somewhere, and therefore we are entitled today to be at a certain position. We have to be respected. Everyone has to respect, even those that do not belong to us. And of course, if there is a conflict, and nationalism creates conflict, that's the other part of nationalism. Nationalism creates community, but creates also conflict. It provides arguments for these, in those polemical situations where we have to show that basically our arguments are better than those of the others. So essentially, this story of origin or nationalism and the way how nationalism is being used is much more about the relation to the present than to the past. That's very important to remember. One word to the picture. This is a picture of the statue of Jan Hus on the Old Town Square in Prague. Jan Hus, the reformer, as you know, and here people from different backgrounds, as you see, are gathering. Those are all Protestants, and it is in the year 1925, creating their community around a statue of someone whom they see, they regard as their predecessor or their father of the Bohemian Reformation in this case. What actually did the Reformation churches, the Reformation churches, what actually did they think about their origins before the arrival of nationalism? Or to put it in another way, what were the images being used in European societies when it was about religion before the arrival of nationalism, so before the 19th century? Obviously, very often we find these images, for example, in medieval or late medieval, in this case, manuscripts. This, as you see, is a Bible, the beginning of the book of Genesis. It's in Latin. And you see in blue the first letter in principio, so in the beginning, God created the world. And there we go. We have the 7 days as the story in Genesis is being told about the creation. And next to that, we have Jan Hus, who is on the pyre in Constance in this case. So the origin that we have goes back to Genesis, but includes also the story of Jan Hus. Or in another manuscript that we would find, from 16th century in this case, we see Jan Hus down there on the pyre. So we are going to sing a song to him on his Saint's Day. He's a saint of the church in this case. And on top we see the beheading of John the Baptist. So one John is on the pyre, that was our last saint, and one John is going to be beheaded, and that was our first John. Both are the saints of the church. On the right side, there's a sort of, let's say, a legend how to read this, namely, well, it's a story of the Reformation starting with Wycliffe, and then went to Jan Hus, and then finally we ended up with Luther. So Lutherans are singing a song for Saint Jan Hus. That is identity question. That is the way how identity was formulated before the arrival of nationalism. In the Lutheran tradition, you find these type of pictures. Of course, Martin Luther, with the Bible, because he translated the Bible. That is a very important aspect. We find also on the left side a candle, because the Reformation revealed again the light of Scripture. So that's a symbol of the Reformation. And in case of Jan Hus, we see also a swan. That's a symbol for the link between the Reformation of Luther and the Reformation of Jan Hus, because Hus means goose. So the swan is a sort of a symbol of the goose. So that is how the Reformation symbolized these let's say these stories of origin. And the more ecumenical approach is all the reformers from the 14th or 15th century onwards around the table. In the center, in this case, Luther, but next to him is also Calvin. And they are all debating what actually the identity of the Reformation is supposed to be. Of course, this is not that ecumenical that it includes also the Roman Catholic Church, because they are the evil ones, as you see there in the company down there of little devil trying to get rid of that light. So that is the polemics there, but this is about the identity of the Reformation. It's an ecumenical approach, essentially. Just the last slide, because I like it so much. This is how the Reformation was depicted in the times of the Enlightenment. You see the reformers down there on both sides, so the little portraits, let's say. But the symbol of the Reformation on the left side is a woman, also on the right side, basically. It's about revealing a revelation, the light goes on. That's basically the message. But the whole point is, before nationalism, the Reformation is about, let's say, the story of the Reformation. It's about how the Church of the Reformation came into being. Now, what nationalism does, and now we have a little bit to say something about nationalism as, let's say, a phenomenon. Nationalism creates a new awareness of time and of history. It recreates history, essentially. And it presupposes that behind the factual events that we are able to decipher, describe from history, there is another story, and that is the story that we have to reveal. And therefore, that behind the story of the events, the facts, the developments, that there is a sort of a subject that is carrying this nation, this history, and that is called the nation. So it's the real story about the history that nationalism creates is based on rise and fall, survival and betrayal, freedom and slavery. Nationalism is essentially a story of liberation. That's very important to see. As we saw, nationalism also results in a new awareness of community. But who is that community? Well, nationalism creates a new notion of community, and that's called the nation. The nation, that is something that we belong to, but actually who defines the nation? Well, that is nationalism, but how do you know that you belong indeed to this nation? Well, in the final sort of this definition that you can give, the final answer to that question is, do you really belong to this nation? The final answer that you can give is not more than, I am acknowledged to be a part of that nation. So it's a mutual acknowledgement. And in a sense, therefore, nation is a virtual community. It's not, let's say, a factually based community. But this nation, in the story of, or in the understanding of nationalism, is the owner of the story, and therefore also of the history, and obviously of the present. So nationalism creates, in the end, a new structure of society. Religion is a part of that. Religion is a function, let's say, of the story of the nation. And the reformer, in the end, is nothing more, but also nothing less than a personification of the nation. So the reformer becomes a sort of a symbol of the nation. He's the hero of the nation. So we find these types of, let's say, understanding storytelling, if you want. So in history books after or in the 19th century about the Reformation, it is him who woke up and unleashed our language, the sleeping giant. It's him who turned over the scholastic verbiage, like the tables of the money changers. Through his Reformation, he elevated the whole nation to thinking and feeling. That's very important to see that. It's not only about, let's say, what we are thinking in terms of reflecting on, but it is also what we feel in our bones, so to speak. So the language, that's very often an argument for nationalism to show the Reformation indeed is a part of the national story and therefore of nationalist, let's say, the development, Luther translated the Bible, Hus translated, some of the Bible had influence on the language, so the Bible, the translation of the Bible becomes an act of creating the nation. So there we go. How does that show? The reformer as a hero of the nation. Well, then the reformer has to leave let's say the premises of the religion of the church. Well, the here we have the hero in front of the emperor. We all know who this is, but it is basically not important who this is. The reformer is there as a lonely hero who is defending his program. He's surrounded by his enemies mainly. Perhaps there are some people sympathetic to him, but it is here that he is standing. I can't do differently. That's obviously here the message. This is a similar one. In the first case, it's obviously Luther. In this case, it's Jan Hus, but it's exactly the same setting. I am defending, but I'm alone. The hero is always alone. This is another reformer from the Czech tradition. Again, someone who is, let's say, trying, or he is in temptation to betray, and that's what is happening here. But now he is seeing through, and finally he decides not to betray, and therefore he sacrifices his life. So the hero who does not betray, and the others are the obviously either those that try to bring him on the wrong way, the path, or are those that betray themselves. Finally, we get into this sort of pictures, more anonymous, a real hero, but in his hand is the chalice. So it's about the Eucharist. So a Eucharistic symbol surrounded by soldiers and a very powerful preacher. Those are all depictions from the 19th century about the Reformation, and we could add a lot more. As I said, nationalism leaves the church as the premise, because we now we need religious symbols in our public space. Religion, therefore, is not anymore owned by the church, so to speak, but religion is now a function of the nation. So the nation becomes the sort of the owner of religion. So therefore, we need new spaces, not only in terms of, well, those pictures, those paintings, and so on and so forth, but we need also statues. Statues that are going to be on public squares. Now, how do you conceptualize those statues? The first attempts about the reformer as a hero and therefore as a statue were made in the early 19th century when people in Germany then were preparing for the first big anniversary of the Lutheran Reformation, so 1817. And for 1817, they said, we would like to have a statue in Wittenberg, a small place, but there was no statue of Luther in Wittenberg, so there had to be something like that. So the first designs, the first projects that were proposed for Wittenberg were a type of a temple, a Greek type of temple, where in the center would be the main hero, so that is Luther, obviously, and around, as you can see on the left side, there would be depictions, or there would be statues of other reformers, other, let's say, saints of the nation and of the Reformation. On the right side,
one question: could we would like to go to the groups? Would you come to?
I can speed up a bit.
Break. Okay.
Yeah, I'm already there, or almost there, so it's no problem. The right side, you see a more modest proposal. So that's that. So indeed, we find this one in Wittenberg, Luther under a little roof, but the roof is basically some sort of temple that's supposed to be others. Followed without a little roof. The main one, obviously, today would be found in Worms. There you can find this type of statue. And there we go. And that's indeed the model that was designed then in the early 19th century. There are also others, as I said, we have already been here, the ones of Jan Hus. Nationalism creates a new type of community, namely the nation. It sacralizes, it makes the nation a sacred community. The nation is giving life to you. And therefore, it's also worth to sacrifice yourself for the nation. Nationalism creates new rituals. And basically, those rituals are always sort of pilgrimages. You go to the holy places where the reformers died. You'll find pictures of those events in the case of Hus. And the ultimate consequence of all this is that we erect a cathedral for the nation. So it's a religious place in its design, but it is not designed for, let's say, prayer, church services, but it is for celebrating the nation. Here you can see the structure of this building. This is in Prague. This is the sort of the ultimate model that can be used. So nationalism takes religious models, turns them into something else than they were meant for in order to create community. So, conclusion of this first part is nationalism uses religion and it leads to the secularization of the nation. The nation is a sacred community. So as such, it is basically a religious community, and it leads to a nationalization of religion, and therefore, in a sense, to a secularization of religion. It doesn't ask about God in the end, but it asks about the nation. For the first round, I formulated these two questions. Could you find one example that connects religion and nation in your own context, somewhere perhaps around the corner or on the squares that you are regularly passing? Could you identify such an example? And especially, or the second question, and then what actually are the consequences of this nationalist approach, or the approach of nationalism for religion or for faith? perhaps that would be better. And for our community, our faith community. So these two questions would be for the first round of discussion.
Okay, then thank you. Peter, I ask you to, could you put the two questions also in the chat? That may be helpful to
Okay, I will do that.
remember that. And I would like now to invite you to the discussion groups. I think we can do 5 groups, which would mean that there are 4 to 5 people in each of those sessions. And let's say how much time you would have. I would say about 10 minutes.
Would there be any questions, perhaps, Oliver? I think we should give the opportunity to answer that.
If you have questions, not for discussion, but something which you didn't understand, we are all talking in English, which is not the mother tongue of probably anybody of us. So if you need some clarification, please ask now. I can't see anything. So you are all curious on discussing our questions. I'll send you into the groups, and we will meet again in this plenary round in 10 minutes. So you will see a little countdown at the last minute for coming back. Do you all see the questions? Do you know what to discuss? Yes, very good, thank you. One moment. And you need now to click to get into your sessions in your discussion groups. Hello, everybody back. I hope it was not too big surprise to come back into the plenary session. And I suppose we lost somebody, but I hope all the others had very good conversations. And I would like to invite you, if somebody wants to tell something from your talks, from your discussions. Would you like to give some feedback to everybody?
To break the ice. I found it fascinating in our group that we talked about examples from the past, from the 19th century, from the 20th century, but the first example was one which is came around nowadays, from Romania, where a church is built, the Cathedral of the Redemption of the People. And the question is, who's the people? The question is, who is included? Redemption for whom? Then we talked about Germany, two churches who were destroyed and shall be build up again, and which way they have a certain connotation of nationalism, of past nationalism. And yeah, how in Austria, where I come from, this is a thing of the past, but still very prevalent. There were some exclusions of Protestants exactly because of this, because the whole land was promised to Catholicism, and that's why some Protestants had to get out of the country. So there, the secularization was had some very strong consequences.
Thank you, Markus. Would somebody like to say some words on the second question, the consequences for religion? Or to add something from another context?
We didn't get to the second question because on the first we gave everybody some examples from his country, and we observed that. So the big question in the end was: is it really the Reformation which is related so strong to nationalism, or does it not depend on the confession? Because Orthodox churches nowadays are really strong related to the nation. We heard it also last time, and autocephality and all this stuff. And in our country, so two of us at least feel this really hard. And then we asked, so I asked me, and I put the question: where is there the difference to Reformed countries, which has had the Reformation? Okay, they have stages with reformers. The Orthodox do not have, but all the other nationalistic ideas are also in other countries which don't have Reformation.
Thank you, Maximilian. I think this is a good point to hand over again to Peter Morée to continue the lecture. Just to remind you, we want to have, after the second part of the lecture, we want to have again some discussion groups, and you are invited to continue also these questions you still have from your first discussion now. And hopefully there will remain some time also for a discussion in our whole plenary. So now, Peter, you are invited to continue your lecture, the second part. Yes, we can see that.
I can see it. Okay.
But we can hardly hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's better.
Okay, good. So, second part is, as I said before, turning around the question. Basically asking the question, what actually did churches do with nationalism? How did they react to nationalism and the temptation, certainly, of nationalism in the 19th century? And of course, that very much depended on the context, and the historical context, the context, the political terms, and so on and so forth. But I think we can say something about this question from also theological point of view as follows. Let's see if this is going to work. Yes, there we go. The picture is of churchmen, church representatives, and indeed men visiting President at his residence. So, how did the notion of nation become a part of the language of the church? Well, in many cases, during the 19th century, and especially in the beginning of the 20th century, nation became a notion in theology. The nation was then seen as a part of creation. So God actually created nations, not only men and women, obviously, so mankind, but and God created communities, and that includes also the nation. So the consequence of that is that every one of us has to be a part of a nation. You can't live without a nation. You are created into a nation. And the consequence of that is then also that you can't change actually your nation, because in the end you are you can't change your identity. That's the point of this approach to theology. So nation is a given thing. It's a part of the order that God created into his creation, into the world, into society. And that is something that we cannot change unless we would like, or we are committing sin. That's very important there. So the identity of the religious community at that point becomes also the identity of the nation. We are going to say, or churches were going to say, our history actually copies the history of the nation. And as I said, nationalism creates a new approach, a new notion, a new understanding of history, a new sense of history. So the history of the church, as it is being told by the church community, is becoming a parallel to that. We have many examples of that. One would be, for example, of the country that I live, here in case of the Czechs, a small, tiny Protestant community. By the end of the 19th century, said, well, actually, we are representing the soul of the nation because we belong to the same tradition, to the same story of the nation, what the nation experienced in the past, when it was a great nation, in times of Hus, we experienced as well. At that time, we were also a great religion, and then we went through this whole suffering, both on the side of the church and the nation, after the after or in times of recatholicization. And now finally we can get back. So everyone basically has to be a part of our church. So the nation then is the claim of this understanding from the side of the church, again, of national identity, that the nation has to join the church. It can only flourish and blossom to the full if it indeed accepts also the right faith, and that's our faith, obviously. So religion, as we see it might be in this case Protestant, or it can also be Orthodox, represents in that sense the soul of the nation. It is one being. So we see that nations, or the notion of the nation, gets integrated also into church life. The picture is obvious, this case from a French church, those that fell during the First World War. The church representatives, theologians, developed essentially an ethno-linguistic, or ethnic even, concept of the church. The church is only there, only those that are can be a part of our members of our church should be members of the same nation. Or they have to speak this particular language, but that's only the same key. So church is only there for one particular nation. If you belong to another nation, then you have to join another church. So this ethnic notion of churches, that's the consequence of the integration of nationalist ideas into theology. And obviously, it's not particularly ecumenical focused and minded. On the other hand, on the contrary, it says basically that only we do represent the true tradition of the nation in the religious aspect, because the others, they are not truly national churches in the sense of representing national values. And as a result of that, those that sacrifice their lives for the nation become saints for the faith. The ultimate consequence is that nationalist wars become religious wars. Examples of that are especially the First World War, when on both sides or several sides of the frontiers that you could find, both on the eastern side and the western side, churches are praying for those that went to war. They did not go to war to defend, let's say, the political institutions of the country, but they went to war for the nation, and therefore they went to war for the faith. So they were actually going to war for God. And the last example of that we have seen, especially when Yugoslavia was falling apart, especially in the Balkans in the last phase, in Bosnia. Another extreme example, the ultimate consequence of this, let's say, approach or this acceptance of nationalism as a perspective also on theology and on the identity of the church, is obviously the justification of exclusion of minorities. And then we especially think about the exclusion of the Jewish minority, for example. In that sense, the church, and not only the church in Germany, but also in other parts of Europe, do have a theological responsibility for what happened during the Holocaust and the attempt to exterminate the Jewish people. What were the alternatives? What were the that were developed in these in this time? Well, to deny, obviously, that the nation is a theological notion. So God created mankind, indeed, but God did not create the nation. The nation is something that developed in time, that is a notion that's due to, let's say, changes. It was not, and then it was, or is, and it might not be in the future. So we cannot take this idea of a nation into creation theology, and we have to be aware of the difficulties and especially of the dangerous aspect of this type of theology. Moreover, we have to be aware in our relation, so the relation of churches, theology, to nationalism and to nationalist movements, that this idea of nation tends to be an expression, or tends to lead to what we then in the theological language would call hubris. So it's something that we think we are more than the others. Because we have a particular history, something that in theology we should, and in the churches we should be very cautious of, because in relation to God we are all equal in that sense. So in Christ there is no Jew, no Greek, or no German, no Czech, and so on and so forth. You can fill in what you would like. So we come to the notion of, let's say, faith that is non-national or supranational. Yes, we all would, I guess, rather go for this type of understanding of theology and church, but at the same time, what are the consequences of that? And therefore, for me, in the very beginning, when we had this mind mapping, it was very interesting to see that roughly the same amount of votes were giving to this what was it, statement, more or less. We should relate to the national context and use the national aspects or the national values that we are linked, that we are, let's say, surrounded by, because we are embedded. We have to be embedded in this particular context. And at the same time, nationalism is dangerous. So those two aspects do basically exclude each other. But at the same time, we all think that. Well, not all, but a significant number of us do think so. So, yes, how to handle this point? The ecumenical movement is basically an answer to nationalism, as it was born before the First World War, after the First World War already. We saw the foundation of several movements in the churches, especially this one particular movement of friendship through churches. Movement is a very long name. I sort of made it shorter. So churches bringing people together and trying to create peace. Churches as founders of peace movements, especially after the First World War. But other movements that were founded as well in the same time or a little bit before that, like the YMCA, student movements, very active, especially in European countries after the First World War, also as an attempt finally to overcome these differences. And then obviously, especially after the Second World War, the foundation of the World Council of Churches, eventually also other ecumenical organizations, trying to overcome the differences. So stressing we are connected, we share the same faith, and yes, there are differences, but those differences do not define us. It's what we have in common defines us. That is from this particular perspective, that is what happened to let's say the answer of the churches to the temptation of nationalism. It's dangerous, so that's basically the main answer. But at the same time, perhaps we have to relate indeed to those let's say contexts. We can't forget where we are living, so we have to also relate to the national history. For example, we have to take into our public identity aspects of the context that we are living in. So we have to also say, yes, we are a part of that national history, but how far does that go? That is basically the main question. It's a dilemma, and it's never a very, let's say, obvious answer that you can give, dependent obviously also on the point whether you, those churches are minority churches or majority churches, or larger or bigger type of let's say confession that they represent. Catholic, Protestant, that might be very different there. Okay, now we go to our final question. That's something that Oliver did not see yet, because he saw my presentation already. Should we sing the national anthem in the church? If so, why? So if not, then why not? So give your reasons. A simple question, but not an easier question, I think, to answer.
Thank you very much, Peter. This was a very interesting, big insight in the long history. You see some hands clapping. It was very interesting also for me. And I would like to start into the discussion immediately, but we do it, of course, again in groups, as I promised. And before that, I would like to give again the occasion to for some direct requests if anybody did not understand anything, comprehension questions, so that we all know what we are discussing about. Is there anybody who would like to ask? So if all open questions are the discussion questions, we go and see our groups again. How do you feel? Would you like the same groups, or would you like some changes, because we did it completely randomly? Yeah, so we do it in a similar way. Some moments, please. Okay. Peter, would you be so kind to put the questions again in the chat?
It's there already.
Oh, that's there. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I send you to the rooms again. What is time for our discussions? I planned about 5 minutes past, or 19:35. That would be 12 minutes. Is that enough? Something more? Okay, so I give you about 15 minutes. And have good discussions in your groups, and see you later then in this plenary session. Welcome back.
Okay, let's go.
We are gathering from the groups together. So you are the first who returned.
Always too short.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have been in some, or actually I looked to all your groups, and I realized that you had really interesting and lively discussions for this time. Yeah, we don't want to go more than until 8 o'clock Central European time. So we need to set a point to come back. But of course, we would like to continue the discussion here. And for first to step into that, I would like to hear some short 2 or 3 minutes reflections, feedback from your groups, and yeah, and then we'll see. I'm really curious what your answers is, if we should see the national anthems in the church or not. Would somebody from the German, there was one group who was German speaking. Would you like to start and report in English what you've been talking about?
In English? joking, yeah. So our answers shortly were between definitely not and maybe rather not. We would not sing the national anthem of the church. But we had other questions. One was what could be possibly a benefit for our Christian communities to sing their own national anthem. One was, for example, in diaspora churches, that maybe you would sing for the national day of your origin country, just to somehow feel with your own origin. And for example, when Germans in different countries sing the national anthem, sometimes for the German Volkstrauertag, the People's Day of Mourning, that makes sense in some way. And you could also say that, for example, there are churches which are totally against the world and society and say all the world is is devil things. And those communities, when they first start thinking about their own society and opening towards engagement in society, could maybe sing the national anthem. But this would be an a movement of opening yourself, your own church tradition towards society, and not closing your country against other countries. It would make sense in some way. But then we asked the question if, what are the dangers? And we thought that in most cases the dangers would be much, much more to sing the national anthem in the church, and that as Christian parish you would not necessarily get a huge benefit from that. And if you sing the national anthem, you should clarify why you sing it and why you do not sing it. So we would say that you would have to make so much clarification beforehand in order to avoid misunderstandings that it's really not the point. You should maybe better leave it because there's so much traps you can fall in.
Thank you, Benedict. Yeah, that's I understand the answer. That's rather not. And I'm interested in what the other groups talked about, if they would have another answer. There was one group, Volkmar, with you together. Who would report from that group?
I think I will report from that group. And we had two types of, or we were from two countries, from Germany and Hungary, or I'm from Romania, but I'm Hungarian. So basically we had two separate lanes. First, the German one, or from the participants from Germany, was almost the same, like better if we sing it, if we don't sing it, because it doesn't really have anything to, so why would we sing it in the church basically, and it would be strange, and that has mostly historical reasons why would be strange in Germany. On the other hand, in Hungary, we agreed that we sing it and we think it's totally fine, or I personally think that we should sing it in the church. The two main arguments are, first, the Hungarian anthem is a prayer to God, so it's not out of context at all in the church. It is, we ask God to bless the nations or the Hungarians. This category can be argued, but basically it's a prayer, so it has its place in the church. And secondly, we think that it's an identity marker, so it can be important to those people to live this, to sing about these things too, especially in a minority situation like here in Romania. So I can agree with what was told, that if we have our reasons, then we can sing it. And I think in Hungarian context, it can be well argumented.
Thank you, István. There was a third group where Dr. Peter Morée was in, and who would report from that group?
Please, Marcus, please.
No, not again me. There was someone else. What about Gaidi or Anna? What about you? I'll do it if you don't, but please do. All right. Yes, okay. So we also had quite a variety of different nations in our group, and that was actually very interesting. I found out and I learned for myself that the national anthem of Switzerland is very pious, so very religious. It is called, please correct me, Anna, the Swiss Psalter, is that right? So actually it sounds more like a church song, handbook than national anthem. And of course there's a discussion going on. We heard about the difference than in Czech Republic, where the national anthem is not at all religious, not in any case. The Austrian national anthem, which is also not very religious. Unthinkable of singing those. It was in Austria, also in Switzerland, but Gerhard just pointed out that the Hungarian national anthem actually is part of the hymn book, could also therefore be sung in in church. So in other words, the situation is very different and varies very much from the context we come from.
Thank you. Maybe somebody from the group would like to add something. You all left it to Marcus. Okay, so let's hear the fourth group, and then we can come to a general discussion. Who would report from the last group who was not reported so far?
And that would be me.
Okay, Miriam.
Our answer was clearly no, never. Don't sing the national anthem in the church. We even pointed it out as a crazy idea. And we had different, like a variety of arguments. The first one was how you define church. And we said church should be a place uniting different countries, nationalities, and so this would be excluding. The second argument was Christological. We said it was brought forth that Jesus didn't teach us to sing the national anthem in the church, and so why should we do this? This is also a biblical argument referring to Galatians 3. And finally, Georgi added from the Orthodox tradition that like singing songs in this way is not part of his tradition, so he also nodded the idea of singing national anthem in the church. And our group, like we had participants from Germany, from Romania, and then from Georgia.
Thank you. Very good. Maybe it would be interesting to hear Peter Morée now. What is that? What you expected? Is that what was your idea when you put that question to all of us?
I think I put a question because it reveals a lot about how we think about nation and church, actually, and because we all know the national anthem, and we all sing it in certain circumstances. And there are traditions, I know that, especially in Central Europe, like in the Hungarian context, where indeed it's even the national anthem is a part of the hymn book. But it's not only in Central Europe. We don't have, I think, anyone among us from the United Kingdom, for example. I mean, in the Anglican Church, you would do the same. Obviously, I mean, even if it is not a part of our hymn books, I think that there could be circumstances, let's say, of crisis, for example, that for many it would be very conceivable to sing the national anthem in church. Fortunately, we do not live in these types of crises, so that might be very good. If we would move the question to the national flag, not in the church, there are traditions where you find them in the church, both on the Catholic as well as in non-Catholic, mainly Protestant churches. Especially again in Hungary, in many churches you would find the national flag. But what about putting the flag on national holidays on the church, so on the church tower, if there is a bell tower or anything like that? Would you do that? So what is there sort of the line? Okay, if you have a small building, then perhaps it's not really necessary. But if you are in the center of town and you are celebrating a national holiday, it's a big thing. So where is the line? How do you participate as a church, and where would you draw the line? That is more difficult, I think, than in case with singing the national anthem in the church. So that is a quick response. One thing perhaps I would like to add. In our group, we had Gerhard from Transylvania, and there you see that they have basically three Protestant traditions there that you could find. And only in one tradition, it would be conceivable, as basically also István said, to sing the national anthem, namely in the Hungarian tradition, not in the others. Yeah, so where does that come from? Yeah, so why would Hungarians in Transylvania sing the national anthem of Hungary? Transylvania is not Hungary. So, I mean, this is about a decision not based on theological issues. This is an issue based or decided, or the reason why you do so is based on different than theological decisions. Now, perhaps that's okay, but it has something to do with what we are talking about. What is the role of national identity in theology in our church communities, and how do we relate to those national communities? How far do we go in integrating this national identity into our theological identity?
Thank you. We are inside of the discussion, and everybody is invited to react and to go on with the discussion. I really appreciate that we are people from so many different countries here, and especially people from churches who are in a certain kind representing national minorities. That is what Peter was now talking about, and there is also the German-speaking church in Romania. Maybe you would also like to react to that, to these questions from Peter Morée.
You asked me?
You and also István.
I let István because I think he will speak very interesting to the question of Transylvania.
It would be too long. I think if I told everything I'm thinking about, I have to make one point, which is important. I think, as I said, it can be an identity marker, which is important. And I think that the people should choose their own identity marker is basic stuff like I can't say anyone what should be your marker or how do you feel yourself. So I think that this question should be answered inside of the local church. We should reflect more. I agree on that, but basically it cannot be without understanding the whole context. It cannot be defined. So when someone knows we spoke about the French or the German anthem, when we try to understand the Hungarian anthem from this side, we won't reach there. And the last remark, just to the text, when this text was written, then it could mean the people also in Transylvania. So it's not that, I think it's not that, sorry.
So often or clear.
So it's not that clear that today's border can define what people should sing here or there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we are celebrating just 100 years in Romania.
Did you want to add something, Gerhard, to this question of the church being also a national minority?
We are very, very little minority. It's not so good to say that it's a little minority, but we are very small community in language, in number, and in confession. Very, very much bigger is the Orthodox Church, and we could sing our anthem our, not the Romanian anthem. We could sing the German anthem of Transylvania in the church, but we don't sing it. We sing it after the service when we are celebrating. It is a very beautiful anthem that could be sung from other neighbors, from Hungarian, from German, and from Romanian, because the Anthem of Transylvania is singing about the beautiful region and country, and where the prayers are going up to the one God, that is our one God. Yes, the Romanian anthem, it is to be understand the historical Romanian anthem is, we cannot sing it in the minority church, in the Hungarian Reformed or in the Lutheran church. It don't belongs. The text, what is singing is not compatible with what we are believe. It sing very nationalism about the Romanian that has to be liberated, and we don't have to sing in the Lutheran service about the Romanian people that wants to be free. It's strange.
Okay, thank you.
Oh yes, I think we have to sing about people that they want to be free. But the problem of the Romanian anthem is that it is really polemic and excluding others and really fighting against others. So it's a in them, it's an Aufruf to fight. That's already the first line of the anthem. That's the problem with it, because I like it really much. It's a really beautiful song, but it's hard also for me to sing even in school, so never in church. But the German anthem, to take that one, wouldn't be better at all for me to sing in church. The Transylvania song, which Gerhard described, that's true. We sing it afterwards. Now I told my group also about it. I think I could sing it also in church, but we don't do, because we don't need. So that one, that identity marker which Istvan described, I'm not sure if it's necessary. So it depends on the group and the community, but for our community, although we are really small, we don't have the necessity to identify us through as a particular group. If we would have the necessity, I think we could sing it, but it is not, and I think it's a good thing that it is not. We don't need it.
Just one sentence. The Transylvanian anthem is not singing a nation. It's singing about the brothers and sisters of this region.
Thank you, Alexander.
Yeah, my question is, how to say, like, do we know churches who really, are theological, arguing that we have to sing the national anthem in the church, and there's a theological sense, or it's just because of our identity, of our community? So are there some churches who are practicing it really like because it makes theological sense, or they're just practicing because it's part of their like identity, or it's an identity marker because of their community?
I'm not sure if we will find an answer here.
If I can respond to that question. Obviously, that would be interesting to find out whether there were debates, for example, in some churches. I know that, for example, in the Dutch church and the Reformed church in the Netherlands, before in the 1970s, there was a big debate whether to include the national anthem into the hymn book. in the end, they decided not to do so. But it was a big debate, and it basically was about what we are talking. So, should we, as a church community, sing a song that comes from a different context and that refers to a different context, or so to a national context? But perhaps that's not even that important. Whether there is some sort of theological reflection on whether we should do so, and so on and so forth. The fact that it is happening in some cases, like in some Central European countries, but also in some Western countries like in England or in America. I mean, in the United States, you would find churches where they fully sing the national American anthem with all that comes to it. That is, I don't know whether you've seen that sometimes, but it's a little bit more than only singing. It's an experience, and so that takes place in church venues. So I think for me it's not really important that that there is no theological debate or the theological decision, because the decision is taken by singing. Yeah. So at the moment that you do it, you take a decision. Yes, we include these national traditions, national identity into into our let's say church faith based community. Now, from there, for me, it's then always a question. Okay, if you do so, do you do so because you think it's, as Istvan says, it's an identity marker? Now, what's an identity marker? I mean, does that mean that then it's the end of debate and we don't think about it anymore because it's about our identity? Or would you say, okay, but here in this particular place, in this church, I am together with my fellow Christians, brothers and sisters, and what we are doing here is of a different type than what we are doing when we meet on the square and we remember some historical dates and historical events for example, the nation. Do you have moments, let's say, that you can just experience one identity without, let's say, also including and introducing the other identity? Yeah, I don't know whether I'm able to make myself clear, but I think that we have to be aware that there are different identities that at that moment come together, and it is not a matter of course that you connect them, but it is a decision. So saying it's an identity marker is not the end of the debate, but it's the beginning of the debate.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I have had a look to the time and realized that it's much later than I thought should be. We were discussing a lot, and I need to stop the discussion now, which is I really don't like to do so because it's interesting, and I realized that there are still many details or many other things of our topic which were not discussed enough. That's the way it is. Some closing words. First of all, thank you to Peter Morée to give us this big picture of the history. Our title was The Protestant Churches Under the Influence of Nationalism, and we learned that there was some influence also the other way around from churches to nationalism. And we realized, I think all of us, that this is an issue which is not only a historical debate, but that is something which is very, very up to date in today's Europe or in many parts of Europe. So we surely will come back to similar discussions, and that's what I want to say. Some words for the end. What you can expect in the next course of our project. First of all, we would like you, all you who participated, to give us a little feedback on how you liked our lecture, our program. You can find that on, there is a special, probably you know that there is this Young Theology website of the project, and here in the chat is the link which should lead you directly to the little feedback form. So that would be nice if you would fill that out. And we will have also some documentation on that page, meaning that the recording of the session and also the following sessions, you can find there already the two lectures which were before. And we will continue with the next lecture on 16th of December, where the topic is going on, and the discussion would be the topic is one church and the plurality of languages and ethnicities. So the question how this goes together, Dr. Stefan Kosoraba, who will be the lecturer next time, has also this Transylvanian German background, and I think we got a feeling that it is very interesting, especially in that region. And a similar topic on multiculturalism in local congregations will start our lectures in January, on 13th of January. So please mark these dates and come and be with us for this next lectures. And the last thing I would like to say in advance is that we all prepare a conference, a meeting in physical presence, not at a video conference, which will be held in Vienna in May, from 11th to 14th of May 2022. So you who are interested in these topics and participated here in our digital academia are very, very welcome to participate also in that conference. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say. Thanks again to all of you for participating. I would like to ask our team to stay in the video conference for some talks after that. And to all the others, have a very nice evening and see you next time.